Before she could finish her sentence, Judge Harrison Cole slammed his gavel so hard the entire courtroom went silent. He pointed directly at the black woman standing calmly before him and shouted, "You people always think the rules don't apply to you. Another word out of your mouth and I'll have you dragged out in handcuffs. Do you understand me?" The woman slowly lifted her eyes toward the bench. And in a voice so quiet that everyone leaned forward to hear her, she said, "I understand perfectly, Your Honor. In fact, I understand much more than you think." What Judge Harrison Cole didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated in front of an entire courtroom was not an ordinary citizen. Within 3 weeks, the most powerful people in America's legal world would watch in stunned silence as his entire career collapsed, all because he had chosen the wrong woman to insult. If you're still with us, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. Now let's begin. The cold rain falling over downtown Chicago painted the streets silver and gray on a Tuesday morning that most people would quickly forget. But Dr. Angela Brooks was about to make it unforgettable. At 50 years old, Angela Brooks was one of the most respected legal minds in America. She had argued landmark civil rights cases, advised governors and senators, and just 2 weeks earlier had been elected as the first black woman in history to become president of the Illinois State Bar Association, an achievement that had made national headlines and inspired a generation of young lawyers who had grown up believing that positions like that were reserved for other people. But today, none of those accomplishments were visible, because Angela had made a decision that shocked even her closest colleagues. She had received a minor traffic citation several weeks earlier. A dozen influential friends had offered to make one phone call and make it disappear. Angela refused every offer. She had spent years listening to stories from ordinary families who felt invisible inside America's lower courts, and now that she led the state's legal profession, she wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. That morning, she deliberately left behind her designer suits and expensive jewelry. She put on a faded navy sweater, old jeans, and tied her hair into a simple bun. She boarded the crowded Red Line train instead of taking her private car, quietly observing the tired faces of construction workers, nurses, and exhausted parents sitting beneath fluorescent lights, all of them heading toward another difficult day. Her chief of staff, Michael Carter, had called her before sunrise. "Angela, are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked carefully. "The judge assigned to your case is Harrison Cole. People have been complaining about him for years. He humiliates defendants, especially minorities. Legal aid attorneys avoid his courtroom whenever possible." Angela had smiled softly while looking out at the city skyline. "That is exactly why I need to go," she replied. "I can't fight problems I don't understand, Michael. If ordinary citizens are suffering, I need to see what they see." By the time she reached Cook County Municipal Courthouse, the atmosphere inside felt heavy with fear. Security officers barked instructions. Metal detectors beeped constantly. Frustrated people sat clutching paperwork, worrying about missed work shifts and bills that could destroy their lives. Angela quietly took her seat in courtroom 5C and folded her hands in her lap. For the first time in many years, nobody recognized her. Nobody saw the president of the Illinois State Bar Association. They only saw a middle-aged black woman in an old sweater, and that was exactly what Angela wanted, because sometimes the truth only reveals itself when power is stripped away. Judge Harrison Cole entered with the confidence of a man who had spent so many years abusing authority that he had begun to mistake fear for respect. At 58, he had developed the permanent expression of someone constantly annoyed by the existence of other people. For nearly 2 decades, Harrison had dreamed of climbing higher in the legal world. He had imagined himself on prestigious federal benches, praised by America's legal elite. But promotion after promotion had slipped through his fingers. His temper, his arrogance, and the growing number of complaints against him had quietly poisoned his reputation among those who truly mattered. Unable to earn respect from his peers, Harrison had chosen an easier target: ordinary people, especially poor people, especially Black and Hispanic citizens. Courtroom 5C had become his kingdom, and every frightened defendant who stood before him became another opportunity to feed his ego. Angela remained silent and observed as case after case unfolded before her, and what she witnessed made her blood begin to boil. A young Hispanic father stood before the bench, trying to explain that he had missed a court appearance because his son had emergency surgery. Before the man could finish, Harrison rolled his eyes and interrupted. "I don't need your excuses, Mr. Ramirez. People like you always have a story. $500 penalty and your license is suspended." "But I drive for a living," the man said desperately. "If I lose my license, I lose my job. Perhaps you should have thought about that before wasting the court's time." Angela opened her leather notebook. Failure to review evidence. Disregard for mitigating circumstances. Hostile conduct. As the morning continued, the pattern became impossible to ignore. When white defendants appeared, Harrison displayed rough patience and occasionally reduced penalties. But whenever black or Hispanic citizens stood before him, his tone transformed into something much uglier. A young black college student named Marcus Williams tried to explain that a parking citation had been issued incorrectly because his vehicle had been stolen. Harrison immediately laughed. "Stolen, huh? That's creative. Maybe next you'll tell me aliens took it." "Sir, I have the police report," Marcus replied nervously. Harrison smirked. "You people always come in here with paperwork and excuses." Angela's pen stopped moving. "You people," 3 simple words, but she had heard them before. She had heard them when her father was followed inside department stores. She had heard them when professors questioned whether she truly belonged in law school. She had heard them when wealthy clients assumed she was the secretary instead of the attorney. And now she was hearing them from a man wearing judicial robes. Then came the moment that made her blood run cold. An elderly black woman named Evelyn Turner slowly approached the podium with a cane, tears in her eyes. She explained softly that she had missed her last hearing because she was hospitalized after suffering a stroke, and that her daughter had brought the medical records. Before she could continue, Harrison let out an irritated sigh. "Mrs. Turner, I've heard enough stories to last a lifetime." "My doctor," I said, "I've heard enough. Please, Your Honor, my husband passed away last year." "I'm trying my best." Instead of showing compassion, Harrison leaned forward and shook his head. "Then perhaps it's time somebody taught you responsibility." He imposed nearly $700 in fines. The elderly woman began crying. Even the bailiff looked disturbed. Several attorneys exchanged disgusted expressions from the back of the room, but nobody challenged the judge. Nobody dared. Because Harrison Cole had spent 20 years teaching people that opposing him carried consequences. As Evelyn Turner slowly returned to her seat, Angela quietly walked over and slipped an envelope into her trembling hands, enough money to cover every fine. Tears filled the old woman's eyes. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Angela smiled warmly. "Sometimes kindness is all we have." Neither woman noticed that the court reporter had witnessed the exchange. "Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you or someone you know ever been treated unfairly by a system that was supposed to protect you? Drop your experience in the comments below. Your story matters and this community is listening. Now let's continue." Nearly 3 hours had passed. The pattern Angela had documented was no longer subtle. It was a consistent, deliberate abuse of power hidden behind judicial authority and procedural language. Then the clerk adjusted her glasses and called out the next name. "Case number 4176, City of Chicago versus Angela Brooks." Harrison barely glanced up from his papers. "Angela Brooks, illegal U-turn." "Do you have an attorney or are you planning to represent yourself?" He chuckled softly. "I should warn you, trying to play lawyer after watching television dramas usually ends badly." "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor," Angela replied, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. Harrison raised his eyes and studied her carefully. The faded sweater, the plain bun, the worn jeans, nothing about her appearance matched the image he associated with intelligence or influence. He smirked. "Wonderful, another legal genius. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Of course." Angela folded her hands gently. "I would respectfully request dismissal based on the officer's failure to establish all statutory elements required under Illinois traffic regulations. Furthermore, I possess video evidence clearly showing that the roadway was empty and no vehicles were endangered." The words had barely left her mouth before Harrison's expression hardened. "Excuse me, the citation contains deficiencies, Your Honor, and I believe the evidence—" "Stop right there." His voice exploded across the courtroom. His hand slammed against the desk. "You people always think memorizing a few fancy words turns you into lawyers." Angela blinked slowly. "You people, again, not hidden, not subtle, not accidental." "With respect, Your Honor, I am simply requesting the opportunity to present." "I said stop talking." The gavel cracked violently. "You do not tell me how to run my courtroom. I'm only attempting to exercise my constitutional rights, and I'm telling you to keep your mouth shut." Angela stood motionless. "If the court would simply review the footage." "Do you not understand English?" Harrison barked. "Or are you deliberately being difficult?" Gasps echoed through the gallery. "Your Honor," Angela said calmly, "I object to the court's refusal to review exculpatory evidence. Denying a defendant the opportunity to present evidence raises serious due process concerns." The moment she uttered those words, Harrison exploded. His face turned crimson. His gavel slammed so hard people physically flinched. "You speak when I tell you to speak. Another word and I'll have you thrown in a holding cell for contempt." Silence consumed the room. Then Angela slowly lifted her eyes and looked directly at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with a level of calm so unsettling that even the judge himself hesitated. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, "I understand perfectly, Your Honor." She paused. "In fact, I understand much more than you think." Something about the way she said those words sent an unfamiliar chill down Harrison's spine, but pride quickly buried the feeling. "I find you guilty," he announced coldly. "Maximum fine $300. He slammed the gavel. "And because your attitude has wasted enough of my time, I'm adding a $500 contempt citation. $800 for a disputed traffic violation." Several people gasped. The bailiff's eyes widened. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a brief second. Harrison added with a cruel smile, "Maybe next time you'll remember that this courtroom isn't one of your neighborhood protests." The racist implication hung in the air like poison. Angela reached into her purse, not with anger, not with panic, but with the terrifying calm of someone who had just realized that her enemy had willingly walked into a trap, so devastating that he would spend the rest of his life regretting the day he opened. Mouth. She placed a titanium black card on the podium and paid every fine. Then, at the clerk's desk, she spoke just loud enough for the room to hear. "I'll need a certified transcript of today's proceedings. Could the court reporter please confirm that every statement made during this hearing has been recorded in its entirety?" The elderly court reporter looked up from his machine. His eyes met hers. Then with slow deliberation, he nodded. "Every word, ma'am." Across the courtroom, Harrison burst out laughing. "By all means, waste your money." Angela folded the receipt and placed it inside her purse. Then she turned around. For a moment, her eyes met Harrison's. There was no anger, no hatred, no fear. Only pity, the kind reserved for people who had already destroyed themselves without realizing it. "Enjoy the rest of your day, Judge Cole," she said quietly. Then she walked out. And the moment those courtroom doors closed behind her, Angela Brooks took out her phone and called Michael Carter. "He did it," she said simply. "He crossed the line?" Michael asked. Angela almost laughed. "Crossed it? Michael Harrison Cole didn't cross the line. He set it on fire. He denied evidence, violated due process, used openly racist language, imposed retaliatory penalties." She paused, "and every second of it was captured by the court reporter." Silence on the other end. Then Michael whispered, "Oh my God." "No," Angela corrected calmly. "Oh my God for him." She leaned back in her car and looked out at the Chicago skyline. "In 4 weeks, the Illinois State Bar Association is hosting its annual Judicial Integrity Gala. The governor will be there, federal judges, state Supreme Court justices, partners from every major firm." She paused. "And Harrison Cole has been begging for an invitation for years." Michael suddenly understood. "Make sure he gets a VIP ticket," Angela said. "Front row. Close enough to hear every word." 4 weeks passed with a quiet intensity that no one inside the Illinois legal system fully understood. Angela had not spoken publicly. She had not issued statements. Instead, she had done something far more precise and devastating. She had allowed the system itself to document everything. Every transcript was certified, every complaint verified. Every case file tied to Judge Harrison Cole was reviewed by ethics investigators and senior Bar Association members who had spent years ignoring the growing rumors surrounding his courtroom. What they discovered was not a single incident, but a consistent pattern of abuse stretching nearly 2 decades, hidden in plain sight behind judicial authority. The Illinois Judicial Integrity Gala was held inside the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors as the state's most powerful legal minds gathered for an evening they would never forget. Judge Harrison Cole arrived early, adjusting his perfectly tailored tuxedo with the satisfaction of a man who believed this was finally his moment. Years of networking and lobbying had earned him a VIP invitation, a seat among the elite. In his mind, tonight was proof that he was no longer just a municipal judge in a forgotten courtroom. He shook hands, laughed too loudly, and spoke confidently to junior judges about maintaining discipline and not letting defendants manipulate the system with emotional stories, completely unaware that several people nearby were already watching him with quiet, measured judgment. Across the room, near the VIP section, Angela Brooks stood in a floor-length emerald gown that shimmered under the chandelier light. She was speaking calmly with a state senator and a federal prosecutor, and when Harrison finally turned and saw her, his glass stopped halfway to his lips. The faded sweater, the plain bun, gone. He blinked once, then narrowed his eyes as if trying to correct what his mind was refusing to accept. Then he walked directly toward her. "I believe I know you," he said loudly. Angela turned slowly. "Yes, Judge Cole, we met in your courtroom." Harrison chuckled, already assuming control. "It's interesting seeing you here. This event is usually reserved for legal professionals, not defendants with grievances." Angela's expression didn't change. "Is that what I am to you? A defendant with grievances? That's how I remember you. Refusing to accept responsibility, quoting laws you didn't understand, wasting the court's time." Before he could continue, the ballroom lights dimmed. A voice invited guests to take their seats. Harrison smiled and adjusted his cufflinks. "Well, enjoy your evening. Try not to cause any more scenes." He turned to walk away. "Judge Cole," he paused. Angela's voice was gentle, final. "You might want to sit in the front row tonight." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Because everything you think you understand about that courtroom is about to be corrected." He forced a laugh and walked to his assigned front row seat. Convincing himself, it was just more empty intimidation from a woman who still believed she mattered more than the system he controlled. He was wrong. The chairman of the Illinois State Bar Association stepped to the podium. "Tonight we gather to honor the principles of judicial integrity and accountability. We also acknowledge the importance of transparency in our lower courts, where justice must remain consistent at every level." Harrison nodded approvingly. Then the chairman looked directly toward the stage entrance. "It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker. She is the first Black woman to serve as president of the Illinois State Bar Association. She has spent her career ensuring that no judge, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be, stands above accountability." The curtains parted, and Angela Brooks stepped into the light. The entire room rose in applause. Harrison did not move, because in that instant, as recognition finally pierced through his arrogance, the color drained from his face. The applause settled. Angela stood beneath the stage lights with quiet authority, letting silence gather weight before she spoke. "Thank you," she began. "Tonight is not about celebration. It is about responsibility." She looked across the audience. "For years, we have spoken about justice as if it is an abstract idea written in books, discussed at conferences, upheld automatically simply because we say it exists. But justice is not abstract. It is lived. Every day, ordinary people walk into courtrooms bringing their fears, their evidence, their pain, and their trust in a system they believe will treat them fairly." Her voice lowered slightly. "And sometimes what they receive instead is humiliation." Harrison's jaw tightened. "In some cases, that humiliation is subtle. In others, it is direct. And in rare cases, it is recorded word for word by official court reporters sitting just a few feet away." Silence fell across the ballroom. Even the glasses stopped clinking. 3 weeks ago, Angela said, I conducted an observation of a municipal proceeding in Cook County under the same conditions experienced by ordinary defendants. No title, no protection. No intervention, she paused. I received a traffic citation. I entered courtroom 5C and I stood before Judge Harrison Cole. A collective shift moved through the audience. Heads turned. Eyes searched, and slowly they found him sitting in the front row. Harrison did not move. What followed, Angela continued calmly, was a clear and documented pattern that included denial of due process, disregard for evidence, and repeated statements reflecting bias based on race and socioeconomic status. A document appeared on the screen behind her. The official courtroom transcript. Every word visible I will now read directly from the record. She opened the folder. You speak when I tell you to speak, and right now you are to remain silent. Another word and I'll throw you in a holding cell for contempt. The ballroom froze. Angela looked up. That was spoken by a sitting judge to a citizen attempting to present evidence. A soft gasp moved through the audience. She continued. You people always think memorizing a few fancy words turns you into lawyers. Silence. Maybe next time you'll remember that this courtroom isn't one of your neighborhood protests. The words landed like stones. Angela closed the folder gently. This is not interpretation. It is not opinion, it is record. More documents appeared on the screen. Case files, complaints, sworn statements, appeals, a pattern stretching back nearly 20 years. Tonight, she said, I am submitting a formal ethics referral supported by over a decade of documented misconduct, including repeated violations of due process, discriminatory treatment of defendants, and abuse of judicial authority. She paused briefly. And testimony from individuals who were previously too afraid to speak. Harrison finally stood halfway from his seat. This is a setup, he said, his voice strained. This is taken completely out of context. Angela turned her head slightly toward him. Her expression changed, not into anger, but into final, absolute certainty. Sit down, Judge Cole, she said quietly, and he did, not because he wanted to, but because everyone was watching. Angela faced the audience again. Injustice does not survive exposure, she said. It survives silence, she let the words settle. Tonight, silence ends. The silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy, alive, and irreversible. Then slowly, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 2 officials from the Illinois Judicial Review Commission walked through, past rows of stunned attorneys and judges, until they reached the front of the room. One carried a sealed envelope. The other held a formal suspension order. Harrison stood again, panic replacing the arrogance that had defined him for 2 decades. This is ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding. I demand to speak to counsel. No one responded. The first official opened the envelope. Judge Harrison Cole, by order of the Illinois Judicial Review Commission, effective immediately. You are suspended from judicial duties pending final disciplinary proceedings. The words did not echo. They landed, final. Harrison's mouth opened. No sound came out. You can't just, this is political, this is... The second official placed the formal suspension notice on the table in front of him. This is not political, he said quietly. This is documented. A wave of sound moved through the ballroom, not cheers. Something closer to disbelief. The sound a room makes when it watches the inevitable finally arrive. Harrison turned toward Angela, his eyes wide now, searching for something, an opening, a mistake, any crack in what had just happened. But there was nothing. Because Angela Brooks had not left a single crack. She had spent 4 weeks building a case so precise, so thoroughly documented that there was no escape from it. Not through connections. Not through authority. Not through the same arrogance that had protected him for 20 years. He had humiliated an ordinary woman in a faded sweater. He had not known she had spent 30 years learning exactly how to make moments like this one impossible to escape. Harrison Cole slowly sat back down. The suspension notice lay in front of him on the table, and for the first time in 2 decades, Judge Harrison Cole was not the most powerful person in the room. He wasn't even close. Later that evening, as the gala continued without him, Angela Brooks stood quietly near the window overlooking the Chicago skyline. Michael Carter appeared beside her. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Angela was quiet for a moment. "I feel the same way I felt in that courtroom," she said finally. "Calm." She looked out at the city lights. "Because this was never about me, Michael." She paused. "It was about every person who walked into that courtroom before me. The father whose license was suspended while his son was in surgery. The elderly woman who stood there trembling with her hospital records. The little girl who asked her father what they had done wrong." Angela turned slightly. "They deserved this outcome too, even if they never know it happened." Michael nodded quietly. Outside, Chicago continued moving, taxi horns, rain on the sidewalks, a million ordinary lives pressing forward. But inside that room, something had shifted permanently. A door had been opened. A pattern had been named. And the voices that had been silenced for years had finally, through one woman's quiet decision to take the Red Line train instead of her private car, found their way into the record. And that is where our story ends today. Angela Brooks didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight. She simply needed to show up and let the truth do what it has always been capable of doing when someone refuses to look away. Before you go, I want to ask you one final question, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments below. Do you believe that people in positions of power are ever truly held accountable, or does justice only arrive when someone powerful enough is watching? Drop your thoughts below. This conversation matters. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Share it with someone who believes in justice. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because every week we bring you stories about dignity, accountability, and the difference one person can make. We'll see you in the next one.